Alright, hopefully you guys can hear me, so just let me know in the chat please when you actually can. And then I guess we're going to get started here. The way we're going to do this today to make it really simple is I'm just going to kind of run down and talk over the study guide quick. So if you haven't done it yet, now would be a good time to kind of get it out and to be able to, be able to fill it in as we go. So let's give it a couple seconds here. Can you guys hear me? How many we got? I got a couple people. We don't have too many people here because obviously with school off, people are going to say, why would they come to this? But anyway, I'm assuming that you can hear me because I can see myself talking in the chat. So I don't know, I forget which microphone is on right now, so I'm going to put this right here. Whoops. Alright, well, anyway, so since none of you guys seem to want to be talking, I'm just going to run through everything real fast in the study guide, and if there's no questions, that'll be it for the night. So, just to show you guys where some things are, for starters, right, when you open up the Google Classroom, the Google Drive link anyway, it should open up to something that looks like this, right? So you have the Interwar and World War II folder, which is what we're kind of working off of right here. So when you open that up, you have a whole number of different things, right? You have the extra credit podcast if you guys want to take advantage of your snow day today and tomorrow to keep working on that. I've got this other hyperdoc thing for you guys, just a whole bunch of interesting links for you to take a look at if you would like. We looked at some of this in class, but ultimately there's more here that's just interesting about World War II. Feel free to take a look at on your own time. So we've also got the wave if you missed part of that in class for whatever reason. And lastly, we've got the review here. We got the incomplete review guide here. We've got the answer keys right there for you, all the notes and things. So let's kind of run through this as a group. Well, really, let's run through this right now, and we'll go from there. Okay, so as you can see, right, we are talking about the interwar period, and the interwar period really means mostly between World War I and World War II, right? We have these two major wars, basically the two largest wars that have ever been fought, and this period in between is known as the interwar period, right? So really, during this interwar period, you are going to get a bit of an experience of worldwide depression. Can you guys see, are you guys able to see the text on this, or is the quality not good enough? I need you guys to let me know. No, it looks like we should be okay. So anyway, right? So during the 1930s, right, and really the late 1920s when this all gets going. The 20s is a really interesting time, right? In America in particular, you're going to have a bit of growth, right? Positive growth and things like that. A lot of... Hey Brian, this is from my World 2 class, so not so much our class, but you're more than welcome to watch as well. So anyway, during the 1930s, you're going to have this depression, right? It's going to be this Great Depression. It's going to go completely worldwide, right? And the big thing is, right, is that Germany is going to end up the biggest loser here. And one of the big reasons is because of the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles is going to lead to all these economic conditions and other social conditions in the country that's going to kind of create these conditions for the growth of things like dictatorships and totalitarianism and things like that, right? And the big thing is reparations. Forcing Germany to pay this money is going to hurt them for sure during this time period, right? And during this period, one country is going to be dominant in the U.S. economy and the global economy, and that's going to really be the United States. You're going to have what's called the Roaring '20s. The stock market growth is going to be considerable. You're going to have a lot of people making a lot of money, and it's going to be a lot of fueled on credit and things like that, right? You're going to have this excessive expansion that happens in the United States and even partially around the world too, depending where. And then all in 1929, you're going to have the stock market crash, which is going to really pave the way for this to kind of hurt, right? It's going to hurt everybody here who is affected by it anyway. A lot of people lose a lot of money, and you're going to have this majorly high unemployment. A lot of the banks are going to fail, and the prices worldwide of goods are mostly going to collapse. You're going to have what's known as protective tariffs, and what's going to happen is people are going to stop trading as a result of it, for the most part. And things are going to get really bad all around the world, right? And this isn't very important because it's going to create those conditions we talked about that's going to foster the totalitarianism and this extreme nationalism, and you're going to get the growth of the political party in Germany known as the Nazis, right? And the Nazis are going to come into power in Germany, led by a man named Adolf Hitler. Germany, when it's suffering through this economic collapse, you're going to have what's called major hyperinflation. Their currency is going to essentially become worthless, really just worth what it's printed on. And these people are going to look for someone to blame, right? And they do, and they find the Jewish people. And they're going to kind of use the Jewish people as scapegoats, and as we know what happens from there, right? So anyway, the interwar period is going to see this rise of dictators. I'm going to see if I can expand this, make it a little bit bigger for you guys. There we go. That should be a little better. The interwar period is going to see this rise of dictators, not just in Germany, but in other countries as well, right? So in the Soviet Union, you will have Joseph Stalin come to power when Lenin dies, and you will get the cementing, really, of communism in the Soviet Union, right, in the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And one thing that Stalin is going to do is he's looking to improve communism and improve the Soviet Union and retain his own power, right? And one of the things he does, his economic plan, is known as the 5-year plan, right? And agriculturally, he's going to look to collectivize all of the farms and to create the farms. There's no ownership, no individual ownership of these farms, right? That's what it means to collectivize, right? And he's also going to look to industrialize the country, massively, trying to make them more modern and trying to get them closer up to standard of some more of the Western countries that we've been talking about, right? And Joseph Stalin is also going to have millions of his people killed or put into prison work camps, and sometimes working in these farms. And this, and getting rid of opposition and things like that, is ultimately going to become known as the Great Purge, right? The camps in particular are known as the gulags, and this is going to be an example of a totalitarian state. So that's really mostly what you need to know for Russia there. So moving along the line, we talk about Italy, right? And the second country is going to be Italy. And you will also get a dictator that comes to power in Italy, and his name is Benito Mussolini. And he is going to believe in what's known as fascism, right? He's going to create fascism and bring fascism to Italy. And fascism is essentially this extreme form of nationalism that takes hold in Italy in particular, and you are going to get a bit of it's sort of racist as well. And what's going to happen is Mussolini is looking to his ambition is to really kind of restore the glory of this old Roman Empire, and rally people around this idea through fascism, and really a complete control of the state and of media and things like that, to be able to kind of manipulate and control through propaganda in his own country here. And one thing that Italy is going to look to do is to invade Ethiopia. And he's going to invade into northern Africa there, and that's going to be trying to expand Italy and its scope and scale in the world, obviously, but through colonization, really, to try to colonize Ethiopia there. So the three characteristics of fascism, right, which we just said, are extreme nationalism, this aggressive militarism, which is this invasion of North Africa, and then just having people be loyal to their authoritarian leader, which in this case is Mussolini, right? So the third country in this case is Germany. We already talked about them very briefly here, but we know that the Treaty of Versailles is going to worsen these economic conditions in Germany after World War I. You're going to get this resentment about the Treaty of Versailles, and you're going to get this economic hardship. It's going to give rise to nationalism as well in Germany, and you are going to get the rise of the Nazis. So this is kind of a little bit redundant here, but as we said, Adolf Hitler will come to power, and one thing that Adolf Hitler is going to do in Germany is trying to look to take control of these other countries nearby, take control of their areas for the German people. So he's going to annex certain countries nearby, places like Czechoslovakia, Austria, and then eventually he's going to invade Poland as well. And that's a big deal, obviously. And one of the things that he's looking to do is, again, kind of get rid of these people in these areas to then pave the way for the German and Germanic peoples to go and move into this area themselves and colonize and settle into this area, obviously at the expense of the Czechs, the Austrians, and the Polish people. So anyway, a fourth country here is going to be Japan, where you're going to also have a sort of a dictator. You will have an emperor in Japan. His name is Emperor Hirohito. He's kind of seen as this kind of almost godlike figure. He's definitely almost divine in the eyes of the people, and you will also have the mainly military leader named Hideki Tojo, and we know that they are going to be responsible for invading a number of Asian countries and kind of having this also mentality of them being this kind of better than Asian, better than race compared to the other Asian cultures in Japan and in Korea and in China and in Korea in particular, right? So they're going to invade, and we know that they do some pretty horrible things. We talked about the rape of Nanking in China in class, and they're going to invade and imperialize in these areas because Japan is a small island, and effectively they're going to need resources as a way of kind of continuing to fuel this expansion and their industry that they just don't have on their own island, and they need to get it elsewhere, right? So that's kind of the prior to and the interwar period stuff that you're going to need to know. So now let's kind of jump into World War II specifically here, right? So what are the causes in particular? So prior to the start of World War II, several of these totalitarian countries are going to be aggressive towards other countries by invading them, right? So we talked about from just a second ago. So you're going to have Italy, Japan, and Germany are the big three here that are going to be the aggressors. The Treaty of Versailles is going to be a bit of a failure on some level because it's going to end up leading into a war, just about 20 years or so later. League of Nations is not going to work out the way they intended it to, and that's going to be a breakdown as well. Which is your C right there. And then, another reason why it's going to start is this extreme nationalism that's going to take place in Germany, the rise of the Nazi Party, and then their actions, right, their aggressive actions as a state toward other countries, right, and you will have them acting, in particular, annexing Austria and Czechoslovakia. The European countries are going to kind of do a policy of what's called appeasement, which is going to be kind of credited with a man named Neville Chamberlain, who is the prime minister at the time in England. He's going to be the one that is blamed on some level of allowing Hitler to do this, but modern scholarship's actually kind of saying that when it comes down to it, they needed to give Hitler this time because they were not ready for a war at this point, and they kind of used this time to kind of start getting ready for one and mobilizing for one if needed, while Hitler was taking control of these areas. So many people in Europe and the United States did not want to get involved in another war so soon after World War I. The scars of the first one were obviously still there, and people didn't want to experience this again. The first one was as bad as we talked about in class, so frankly they just didn't want to, right? So some of these people who are opposing wars are known as pacifists, and then Americans in particular who are just not looking to get involved in a foreign war, right? They want to stay out of these, they're going to be called isolationists. So how does it break down once this gets going, right? So once the war gets going, you're going to have what's called the Axis powers, and it's going to be Germany, Italy, and Japan. And then you will have the Allies as well, which is going to be predominantly Great Britain, Russia, and the United States. France technically is part of that as well, but France, we know, gets kind of dominated pretty early by Germany here. So how does it all start, right? So Germany invades Poland in 1939. Shortly after, you are going to have the fall of France to the Germans as well. You're not going to kind of get this stalemate like happened in the First World War. They are able to take complete control, right? We talked about Dunkirk, the British taking some French soldiers, but also getting off of the continent, getting away from the British. We talked about that, and if you really want to see it, you can see the movie. It's really good. So, anyway, once they take control of France, there's not much left to stop them from heading and trying to attack Britain, and they do, right? So we get the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain is basically a bombing campaign of London and other major cities in England that we showed. You're going to have Winston Churchill and the RAF, the Royal Air Force, that's going to mount a defensive campaign against the German Luftwaffe, which is their air force, and it is somewhat effective. Yes, many people are going to be bombed in London. You're going to have people that are being killed, and there's a bit of destruction in some of the major cities, but ultimately the Germans are never able to get a serious enough damage to be able to actually go and invade into a full-scale invasion of the island, right? So one thing that's really important to note too is that when Germany had invaded Poland, they had made a deal with the Soviet Union to actually kind of carve up the Soviet Union together, right? So Germans would take the western side, the Soviet Union would kind of take the eastern side of Poland. They had signed this non-aggression pact, and so on from there, right? So what's going to happen eventually is that, well, Hitler's going to kind of invade the Soviet Union. He's going to go back on that pact, but we'll get there in a second, right? So we know that Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in December 1941, December 7th, a date which will live in infamy, right? So that's kind of gets the United States, involved. The United States is going to be involved in the war. Obviously, from here on out, they're going to declare war on Japan. When we declare war on Japan, Germany declares war on us, and we declare war back, and we've got the sequel, right? So, a number of years later, after we've mounted a bit of a defensive and then offensive campaign in the Pacific Ocean and even in North Africa, you are going to get the full-scale invasion of Europe at Normandy, France, on what's known as D-Day, which is June 6th, 1944. The Allies will eventually work their way through Europe and towards Berlin and take Berlin. The Soviet Union will have now, once Germany kind of went against them, the Soviet Union will side with the Allies, and they will hold on the eastern front and then push back toward Berlin, as the other allies, England and America and the French resistance, will begin pushing in from the west in particular, and they're going to meet somewhere in the middle, although the Soviet Union does get to Berlin before the other allies. So once the war is over in Europe, we do know that we also have a war going on in Japan and in the Pacific Ocean, right? So by 1945, the United States is going to drop the atomic bomb in August of 1945 on Japan at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we will have ourselves the end of the war, VJ Day, right? So that's really it. That's all you need to know kind of as far as the events of World War II in particular. So then, as from a genocide standpoint, the mass killings of human beings, right, that is genocide. It's a systematic and purposeful destruction of a racial, political, religious, or cultural group. And I think that's the whole idea, is that this is a purposeful situation trying to get rid of every single one of these people. So briefly describe what the term master race means, and this is kind of Hitler's idea of this Nazis and Germanic and Nordic peoples kind of representing this pure race, right? These Aryans, he calls them these blonde hair, blue-eyed people, right? The two isms that help make the Holocaust possible is this extreme nationalistic pride, nationalism in their own country and in their own country's actions, and then totalitarianism, right? We watched The Wave, and you can kind of see how people might be influenced by those kind of things. So list the three things that help make the Holocaust possible. You have the anti-Semitism, Germany's defeat in World War I, and economic depression is going to be blamed on the Jews, and then this idea of the master race, right? So, following World War II, the Allies are going to hold war crime trials of people in Japan and also the Nazis, and this is going to take place in Nuremberg, Germany, and then Tokyo, Japan, for the Pacific Front, and the Japanese and their actions, right? So, the two major powers at the end of the war is the United States and the Soviet Union, and you will get this post-war world where you're going to get the Cold War, right? This now communist Europe versus the capitalist Europe and America, really, and you're going to have this evolution of the Cold War, right? And you're going to have Winston Churchill giving this speech, I believe in like Kansas of all places, and he's going to give this speech about the Iron Curtain descending across Europe, dividing the free Europe from the communist Europe, where the Eastern Europe is where communist control had kind of fallen into, right? So the United States, as a means of trying to prevent communism spreading in Europe, is going to develop what's known as the Marshall Plan, which is by General Marshall, who's one of your people that you should know. He is pushing this plan, this economic plan, essentially to help rebuild Western Europe and reconstruct it, and that's trying to help to prevent the spread of communism, right? Because these areas were susceptible to it, right? They've been destroyed. The idea of having a job given to them and having the government rebuild their houses and homes for them is promising, right? That sounds really good to these people. So communism was a little enticing, and the democratic areas of the West didn't want that to happen, so they inject a whole lot of money into the West. The United States does in particular with the Marshall Plan, right? So you are going to also get the creation of the United Nations as well, which is the kind of the follow-up to the League of Nations, right? And ultimately, you are going to have treaty organizations as well. So a lot of the groups in the West, so France, England, the United States, among others, are going to join what's called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where they are going to kind of band together that if one of these countries are attacked by another country, in particular a communist country, then they will all join in to the fight, right? So the Soviet Union institutes their own similar treaty organization known as the Warsaw Pact. So in the same capacity, if any of the NATO countries attacked or invaded a Warsaw Pact country, well, you're going to have ourselves a big old war. This new world war, which is not going to be a hot war, is going to be known as the Cold War. There will be proxy wars that are fought as a result of the Cold War, in particular in Korea and also in Vietnam, among other places as well. But ultimately, this is going to not be major fighting between the major powers here. You are going to have a lot of the European powers gradually losing their empires around their world. And so anyway, Germany after the war is going to be divided into 4 real zones, but technically, really kind of 2, a communist zone and a non-communist zone, right? It's West Germany and East Germany. West Germany being the non-communist side, and the East Germans being the communist side, right? And in addition to that, Berlin is a city that's going to operate completely in the East German zone, so in the communist zone. However, Berlin will also be divided in a similar manner, so you will have a non-communist side of Berlin, and this gets really tricky because you have Berlin being completely in the communist side, and Stalin's going to want to get control of that, and you're going to have what's known as the Berlin crisis and things like that, but that's going way beyond where we are right now. We'll learn about that in a bit, probably. So, anyway, which country is going to control the Eastern zone is the Soviet Union, the Western zone is the United States, England, and France, right? So we have our democratic countries in the West Germany, we have our communist countries in the East Germany, and you will really, with this injection of the money from the Marshall Plan, you are going to get this West Germany being sort of an economic power, right? And East Germany is going to lag behind a bit, right? So now to kind of sum it all up here at the very end anyway, not really sum it up, but just kind of take it home here. So after the war in Japan, the United States is going to occupy Japan. The man who's going to be in charge of this occupation is a man named Douglas MacArthur, who was one of the main generals on the Pacific Front as we headed west across the Pacific Ocean. You will get a democratic government that's going to be instilled in Japan after the war, but Japan will not be allowed to have an actual army. They have a defense force, but they cannot have any offensive army. That the United States is guaranteeing their security to prevent them from having this as a result of the treaties and things like that. Right? But we do know that Japan kind of is now going to be a little bit of an economic powerhouse there. They've been able to push all their resources into its economy, and they've been very effective, right? So there's a whole sorts of people here as well that you can take a look at on the study guide on the answer key to help you with your people project. Remember, your people project is going to be due the day of the test, whenever that's going to be. So there's people, and there's some dates that also you should know. So on that said, if there's no more questions, I'm going to end this live stream. Since there really doesn't seem to be any questions anyway. So I'm going to end this, and that'll be all. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to answer whatever questions you want here, and then I'm going to call it. And hope you all enjoy your snow day tomorrow. Alright folks, good night, and have a great spring break, since it doesn't seem like I'm going to see you now before break is over. So have a great one, guys. See you later.